Hi again. I've had a lot of requests to talk about the diaphragm, and when you go to this subject, the question for me is always, where do I start with it? So I'm going to say that this is Diaphragm 01 and that we're going to look in a bit more detail at different parts of it in future videos. If we go back to the problem with anatomy, and I talked about this a lot before, and the problem of anatomy in general, we have to understand that the diaphragm is something that is often displayed as a sort of a separate structure. You put carved out and there it is, and this is the muscle that gets described. And the way that we get that is by cutting along the line of the rib cage here and pulling out this bit of tissue. You can understand why it's done, but unfortunately it sort of creates this false idea of that the continuity that exists in this area. So we lose that continuity and the importance and significance of it, and what happens when we have it joined up. And by taking it out and looking at it individually, we miss that. So the obvious function of the diaphragm is to help change the pressure in the thorax and create a separation between the thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity. So breath is all about the pressure outside of the chest to inside. It also serves, though, as an attachment point for a few organs, particularly the liver, the stomach and the spleen. They're sort of attaching to the diaphragm, and so is the heart. So stuff is attached to the diaphragm. We sort of tend to forget that when we look at the individual structure. Now, this is kind of cool when you think about it, that you've got this thin sheet of muscle that joins the liver and these other organs that are now effectively suspended and held in place close to or underneath or actually on this muscle. So, and it also means that each time we breathe in and out, around 15 to 20,000 times a day, the diaphragm is moving these structures, or these structures are moving with the diaphragm, and the contractility is going to help in massaging or moving them. So the obvious thing about the diaphragm, as I said, is about the breath, and breathing is about the pressures. So essentially nature abhors unequal pressure. So when the diaphragm contracts and flattens, it creates space in the thorax, and so this allows for air basically just to rush in, and the pressure from outside to inside to be equalized. When the diaphragm then relaxes, it sort of domes, and we call this an out-breath. So the pressure outside the chest, as I said, needs to be the same as inside the chest. And when we go up into the mountains, or up into where the air is thin, high altitudes, we might find it harder to breathe because we need the oxygen to get around our system. The air pressure is lower, and this means that we're going to have to work a lot harder to fill our lungs up and get that oxygenated blood around our system. So it becomes tiring, and that's really what it's all about. It's about getting the oxygenated blood around the system. So as we breathe in, we exchange a little molecule of oxygen with a molecule of carbon dioxide, and we have to get that oxygen molecule, to ride this dimpled red blood cell. It's a dimple because it hasn't got a nucleus, and it gets rid of the CO2 molecule on the out-breath. So if the pressure is lower, it doesn't make any difference. We still need oxygen saturation in our tissues, and all it means is that we're going to have to recruit a lot of other structures to create more space in this thorax, and probably are going to have to increase our rate of breath or respiration alongside it, to make sure that these oxygen levels remain at a consistent and good rate. So it means that we're going to be working a lot harder, and it becomes more exhausting. Muscles are needing energy, and of course oxygen as well, and we'll find as a result that we can get quite unwell. You've heard of altitude sickness and so on and so forth, and if we're untrained or not fit enough to be able to cope with this, then it's going to be hard work. And you find that people that football players had to play at high altitude a few years ago in the World Cup, and they had to spend some time at that altitude to get used to it. So the example for us where we might see people on a day-to-day basis is a condition called COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So often as a result of smoking, it's where the elastic tissue gets broken down in the lungs and you don't get this full recoil. So if you imagine the breathing out and the breathing in, the relaxation of the diaphragm allows for the lungs to return to their original state. And if they don't do that, then it's going to be harder to get a full breath when you need it. So this elasticity is a required function of our lungs. People will often need to use a load of other muscles and often get supplemented with oxygen in order to be able to get continue to get this breath going, and it's absolutely, you know, exhausting. So remember, the lungs are an organ of the back. You know, we tend to forget this, and they take up a huge space in the thoracic cavity. And we'll have a look at the lungs in a separate separate video another time. But it's just remembering the sheer size of the lungs. You know, I ask people to draw the lungs on their chest, and they sort of come up to here, but actually the top of the lungs is right up in there. And it reflects the amount of work, you know, the size of them reflects the amount of work to keep them going. You know, you can not eat or drink anything for days, you know, you can go without food for quite some time, but try not breathing for a little while, and you'll find it's a little bit trickier. We often have people talking about the idea of breathing through the diaphragm or breathing through the abdomen, and it's just really one of those statements that is a kind of impossible. You know, your muscle of breath is your diaphragm, and so if you were trying to breathe through your abdomen, then not a lot would happen. But you can see people distending their abdomen. So it's this space that we're looking at. There's a lot of ideas that people have about how you should or shouldn't breathe. For most of us, there's different ways that we can improve our oxygen take with very little effort, and a lot of these are going to be around control of the diaphragm. There's one that I like, which I really like, is when you take a big deep breath in like that, and you count out loud. You count out as fast as you can out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you keep going as far as you can get to. See how far you can get to, and as you do this more often, you find that you can get high. You know, no cheating. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, so you don't miss a breath, don't miss any numbers, and keep going. See, so try it. See how you get on. You know, put your number down below. It's not a competition, but if you do better than anybody else, then you win. And you will improve it. You'll find that you're getting better, more control of the breath. I think the diaphragm's very involved in asthma. We talk about the bronchiole as a spasm, but if we think of also the diaphragm effectively, you know, not working or not contracting or moving in the right way, then I see asthma attacks, and there's a procedure that we do that can stop an asthma attack immediately, sort of resetting it, and I'll show you that in another video, but it is a lifesaver. So the nerve that is majorly in control of the diaphragm is the phrenic nerve, and this is coming out from C4 in the neck. So you mean any high neck injuries can have implications for breathing as well, and you know, there's lots of other elements that are going to impact on our breathing. So there's so many things that, you know, we can have conscious and unconscious breath, you know, singing and coughing and laughing and spluttering and all these things. These are all a conscious and unconscious elements of breath, but for the most part we don't know we're doing it. We don't know what's going on. And interestingly enough, we don't really know why we breathe. I know that's, you know, we'd die if we didn't, but from a scientific perspective, it's kind of weird and cool that we don't know the mechanisms of action that really make us breathe. So the fascia of the diaphragm is really interesting, as much as it's sort of lying on top of it within the thoracic cavity. You've got this sort of pleural layer, the visceral pleura, and then underneath that you've got a thoracic, diaphragmatic fascia, and then you've got the muscle, and then you've got another layer of fascia, and then you've got the parietal peritoneum on the inside. So there's quite a few layers of connective tissue and linings across the top of the diaphragm and underneath it. So anyway, there's loads more to talk about the diaphragm. This is a sort of quick whistle-stop tour of our starting point. We'll cover it in a live session very soon. I'll also be running a webinar on it very soon as well. So in the meantime, keep breathing, do the things you're supposed to do on social media, like and share, and leave your comments. What else have we got to talk about as far as the diaphragm is concerned? What else do we want to know? And have a little look out. Go and check out my website, functionalanatomy.com, for loads of existing webinars and dissections. There's lots of stuff on there on the diaphragm as well. And I'll see you next time.